Was the initial plan to pull the car around back, and then they had to abort mission, and the driver came up on the circle driveway instead, and then they went out the front door. Part of the plan was to remove Nancy via the front door.
She spent her career on her knees at crime scenes. Not metaphorically, literally, on her knees, with brushes, with cameras, with oblique lighting rigs, coaxing evidence out of surfaces that looked like nothing to everyone else. Surfaces that, in the wrong hands, with the wrong training and the wrong equipment, would yield nothing, go unprocessed, and take their secrets to the archive. Maureen O'Connell was a special agent with the FBI's Evidence Response Team, one of the most elite forensic units in the country. She was not a detective. She was not a profiler. She was the person who processed the scene after the detectives cleared the tape. She was trained to see what other investigators missed. And on day 71 of the Nancy Guthrie investigation, she sat down with Brian Enton of News Nation and watched the drone footage of Nancy's property. The footage that this entire community had been pausing and rewinding and screaming at their screens over. She watched it the way she was trained, not at the back gate, not at the front door, not at the windows or the flower pots or the door frame. She looked at the driveway. And what she found, or rather what she did not find, is the most important forensic observation this case has produced in weeks. And this is the video that connects what a trained FBI forensic eye saw and did not see on that circle driveway to the full chain of physical evidence that this investigation either has or may have permanently lost. Subscribe to Evidence True Crime TV right now and turn on the bell, because what Maureen O'Connell looked for on that driveway, what the decomposed granite surface of that circle driveway may have held, and what the timing of this investigation may have cost, that is the thread we are pulling on today, and you want to be here when it reaches its conclusion. Quick note before we go in. No individual is named or implied as a suspect in this video. All named sources are identified throughout. Maureen O'Connell's statements are sourced from her on-record Day 71 interview with Brian Enton at News Nation. Analytical inferences are labeled as such throughout.
Nancy Guthrie is 84 years old. She's a mother, a grandmother, a woman who went to dinner with her family on January 31st and came home and was taken in the night. A woman who has been missing for 71 days, while investigators and journalists and forensic experts and this community ask the questions that official channels have not answered. If you are a person of faith, please say a prayer for Nancy Guthrie right now. Pray that she is found. Pray that every piece of evidence this investigation had was captured in time. Pray that the people responsible are identified and held accountable. Pray for her family, who have been living inside this uncertainty for 71 days. Amen. Type Amen in the comments right now. And if prayer is not your practice, hold her in your thoughts, because that is what this channel exists for. Not the forensics, her. Let Nancy's family know that people watching on every continent have not stopped praying for her and fighting for her. In about 60 seconds, I am going to tell you exactly what the FBI's Evidence Response Team is, what Maureen O'Connell's specific training means for her professional assessment, and why what she says about a crime scene is categorically different from what anyone else says about it. Maureen O'Connell served as a special agent on the FBI's Evidence Response Team. Let me be precise about what that means, because it matters for everything that follows. The Evidence Response Team, the ERT, is the FBI's dedicated forensic unit. These are the agents called in for the most complex, the most sensitive, the highest stakes crime scene processing in the country. Presidential events, mass casualty incidents, federal crimes where the evidence is so critical, so fragile, so contested that you cannot afford to get it wrong. Where a procedural error at the scene is not just an embarrassment, it is a case-ending failure. ERT agents go through specialized training that covers a wide spectrum of forensic disciplines: blood spatter analysis, digital forensics, latent print recovery, trace evidence collection. And within that world, tire impression analysis is not a footnote, it is a core discipline. ERT agents are trained to find, photograph, preserve, cast, and analyze tire impressions.
The very first thing she looked at, her exact words, was the driveway. And she only saw one set of tire impressions in the drone footage. O'Connell looked at that drone footage and she did not look at the back gate. She did not look at the camera. She looked at the circle driveway. In about 60 seconds, I'm going to tell you exactly why and what she found there that has been sitting with her since day 71. Stay with me. Now, for a moment, I want to speak directly to you. Tell me where you're watching from. Because right now, this story isn't just being heard in one place. It's reaching people across the world. From the United States to the UK, Canada, Australia, and beyond. People who follow cases like this, cases where justice took years, where families refused to give up, where the truth almost disappeared. And here's the truth most people don't realize. This channel is still small, which means every single viewer matters. Every like, every comment, every subscribe is what tells the algorithm this story deserves to be seen. So if you believe stories like this should never be forgotten, hit subscribe. Because the more people who see this, the harder it becomes for the truth to stay buried. Let's talk about the circle driveway, because this detail is about to carry significant weight in everything that follows. Nancy Guthrie's home has what is commonly called a circle driveway, a curved, looping driveway at the front of the property that allows a vehicle to pull in, loop around, and exit without reversing, common in properties of this type across the Southwest. Most of the time, it is just a driveway. But let's think about it from a different angle. A circle driveway is designed for convenience, but it is also, from a purely tactical standpoint, designed for a quick exit. You pull in, you do what you need to do, you leave. You do not back out into traffic, you do not have to reverse down a residential street where someone might see you, you do not execute a three-point turn. You leave forward-facing, at speed, the moment you decide you want to leave. Full visibility forward, no awkward maneuvering. Pull in, load, roll forward, gone. If someone was planning to remove Nancy Guthrie from her home quickly, quietly, against her will, in a way that minimized the time the vehicle spent in a compromised position, a circle driveway is exactly where you would want to stage that vehicle. O'Connell said as much. She told Brian Enton directly that the circle driveway at the front of the property is where she believes the vehicle that transported Nancy was positioned. Her exact words, "The circle driveway is where I think the car pulled up to get her." This is not a casual opinion from someone who watched some drone footage and had a thought. This is the considered professional assessment of a career forensic investigator who has spent her life reconstructing what happened at scenes, working backward from the physical evidence to the human actions that left it. When someone with her background points at a specific location on a property and says, "That is where I think the vehicle was," that is worth following to its full forensic implications.
The immediate question is why the front? We know there is a back gate. This series has spent significant time on the rear access, the staging theory around the back door, the evidence suggesting deliberate manipulation of the rear scene. Why is a trained FBI forensic agent pointing to the circle driveway at the front of the house? This is where O'Connell's theory gets operationally specific, and it involves something that at first glance sounds almost too mundane to be significant: a dog. The property adjacent to or near Nancy's home has a dog, and according to O'Connell's analysis of the situation and the evidence, that dog may have been a factor in how this abduction unfolded. Think about what that means. Dogs bark at unfamiliar people. Dogs bark at unfamiliar vehicles that do not belong. They bark at unusual sounds and smells and presences that are out of the ordinary pattern of the neighborhood. In a quiet residential neighborhood in Tucson, at whatever hour this took place, a dog barking persistently at a vehicle parked in the rear of a property is exactly the kind of thing that attracts attention. It gets a curtain pulled back. It gets a porch light turned on. It gets someone stepping outside to see what the dog is reacting to. O'Connell's professional read is that something, possibly the dog, possibly another unanticipated development at the rear of the property, caused the people involved to change their plan. The rear exit was compromised, the vehicle moved to the front, and the circle driveway became the exit point. And here is how the two theories, the rear staging and the circle driveway, fit together, not as contradictions, as a coherent operational picture. If the back of the property was staged as deliberate misdirection, designed to draw investigative attention to the rear access point, to create a narrative about how Nancy left, then the actual vehicle may have been positioned somewhere else entirely. The staging creates the story. The real exit happens at the front. Alternatively, if the back gate was the original plan and something disrupted it, the circle driveway becomes the improvised solution. Either way, staged misdirection at the back or disrupt.
The core issue is this. DG is not fixed. It is a loose, shifting, granular material. It compacts under pressure, under a vehicle's tires, under foot traffic. But that compaction is not permanent and is easily disrupted. When a vehicle drives over decomposed granite, it does leave a tire impression. The weight of the vehicle presses down on the granules, creating a pattern that corresponds to the tire's contact surface. But that impression, unlike an impression in wet soil or mud or clay, is fragile. It can be disturbed by subsequent foot traffic. It can be shifted by another vehicle. It can be broken down by wind or by rain. In a desert environment where wind is a regular presence and temperature cycling causes material movement, the window for recovering that impression before it degrades is not generous. There is also the issue of visual complexity. Decomposed granite has a naturally irregular, heterogeneous surface texture. It does not look like smooth mud where a tire impression stands out clearly to the naked eye. The impression exists. The compaction pattern is there, but it can be nearly invisible without the right conditions and the right equipment. Which brings us to the photographic challenge. O'Connell named the technique that bridges the gap between a difficult surface and a usable impression. In about 60 seconds, I'm going to explain exactly how it works and why it is the difference between evidence and nothing on a surface like decomposed granite. Stay with me. Tire impressions in decomposed granite do not photograph the way tire impressions in mud or soil do. You cannot walk up to a driveway, point a camera at the ground in normal daylight, and capture an image that is forensically useful. The surface does not work that way under standard lighting conditions. The key technique O'Connell referenced, the technique that forensic photographers use specifically for granular surfaces and challenging impression evidence, is oblique lighting. Oblique lighting means positioning a light source at a very low angle relative to the surface you are photographing, almost parallel to it, raking across it, so that the light creates shadows in any depressions or raised areas in the surface. When you do this, features that are completely invisible under normal overhead or ambient light suddenly become visible, because the shadows they cast under the raking light create contrast that the camera can capture. You have probably experienced this principle in everyday life without thinking about it forensically. Have you ever tried to see footprints in a carpet by holding a flashlight parallel to the floor? The footprints that were invisible in normal room light become clearly visible the moment you get that light source low and let it rake across the pile. That is oblique lighting. That is the same principle applied to a decomposed granite driveway.
The light at the right angle creates shadows. The shadows create contrast. The contrast reveals the impression. Without oblique lighting or an equivalent technique, tire impressions in decomposed and photographing the impression correctly is only the beginning. You also need scale. A calibrated ruler or measurement scale bar placed in the frame at the same plane as the impression. Without that scale documentation, measurement comparisons are unreliable. In court, that scale is not optional. It is the standard. That is the technical framework O'Connell was evaluating when she watched the drone footage. And it is the standard against which she assessed what she saw and what she did not see on that circled driveway. I need to stop here because this is the moment I ask for your support. If you are still watching, you understand the forensic stakes of this driveway. You understand what decomposed granite does to evidence. You understand what oblique lighting can reveal and what happens if no one uses it. If this level of forensic analysis, the kind that follows the evidence to where most coverage stops, matters to you, please subscribe to Evidence True Crime TV right now. Hit like on this video. And before we go on, I want to ask you something. Type Amen in the comments if you are still watching for Nancy. Let her know this community has not moved on. Then stay, because what O'Connell saw and didn't see in that drone footage is what comes next. She watched the drone footage, and she watched it the way she was trained. Not looking at what was dramatic or immediately visible, looking at what was being worked. What investigative process was visible on that scene? Specifically, whether investigators were conducting the kind of careful, systematic, technique-specific evidence collection on the driveway surface that the situation warranted. And here is what she said on the record to Brian Enton. She did not see, in the available drone footage, evidence that anyone was working tire impressions in the circle driveway. No oblique lighting equipment, the kind of portable rigs ERT agents bring to scenes for exactly this purpose. No technicians on their knees at ground level with scales and cameras positioned for impression photography. No systematic, grid-based documentation of the front driveway surface. No visible activity centered on the decomposed granite of the circle driveway that corresponded to the kind of impression recovery work she would expect to see on a scene with this profile. Now, and this is where O'Connell's intellectual honesty becomes important to register, she was careful. She acknowledged explicitly that the FBI may have done that work at a time when Enton's drone was not overhead, at 4 a.m., before the initial media presence, during a period of scene access that is not captured in publicly.
The gap in the evidence is not nothing. It is a question that has not been answered. What O'Connell saw is the beginning of the concern. What she could not know, what nobody outside the investigation can know, is the timing question. And in about 60 seconds, I'm going to walk you through exactly why that timing question may be the most important unanswered forensic question in this entire case. Stay with me. Let me bring in the broader context, because what O'Connell is describing is not just about photographs, it is about timing. And in forensic evidence collection on a scene like this, a high-profile scene, a scene with multiple agencies involved, a scene that was processed under public scrutiny, a scene that was released and resealed multiple times, timing is everything. We know, and this is confirmed public record, that Nancy Guthrie's property was not maintained as a continuously sealed, protected crime scene from the moment of discovery through the completion of all evidence collection. The scene was released. It was accessed by multiple parties for multiple purposes. Vehicles came and went. Investigators moved through it. Now think about what that means for a tire impression in decomposed granite. Every foot of traffic that crosses that driveway surface disturbs the granular material. Every vehicle that enters or exits compresses and shifts the DG. Every disturbance potentially degrades, alters, or destroys a tire impression that may have been left in that surface by the vehicle that transported Nancy. The question at the center of O'Connell's concern is this:
How early in the investigation did anyone identify the circle driveway as a potential vehicle staging location? And how quickly was that specific surface secured and protected specifically for forensic impression recovery? If investigators identified the circle driveway as a staging location on day one and immediately cordoned off that specific area, there is a reasonable chance that usable impressions were preserved. But if the significance of the circle driveway was not recognized immediately, if the scene was accessed multiple times before anyone was systematically thinking about tire impression recovery in that specific location, the window may have closed quietly without anyone realizing it in time. O'Connell did not speculate about the specific timeline. She cannot know from outside the investigation when each piece of the scene was recognized, prioritized, and processed, but she raised the concern, and it is a concern with a precise forensic basis, not an emotional one, not a speculative one, a practical, technical concern about surface degradation and evidence preservation timelines. The window always closes in every investigation, in every crime scene in the country. The first hours and the first days determine what evidence survives and what does not. That is not a failure specific to this investigation. It is a reality of how crime scenes work. The question is always whether the right evidence.
A clear, well-photographed, properly scaled tire impression from the circle driveway at Nancy's home could potentially tell investigators the tire model. The tire model narrows the vehicle class. The vehicle class, combined with other investigative work, surveillance footage, witness accounts, electronic records, could produce a specific vehicle. And a specific vehicle could produce leads to the people who took Nancy. That chain, impression to tire, to vehicle, to person, does not start without the impression. And the impression starts on the ground, in the decomposed granite, in the circle driveway, at the moment the scene was still intact enough to hold it. Let me be direct with you about what we know and what we do not know, because this channel does not present speculation as fact, and you deserve the honest version of where the evidence ends and the inference begins. We do not know whether the FBI recovered tire impressions from the circle driveway. We do not know whether they attempted to, and if so, at what point in the investigation timeline that work was conducted. We do not know whether the surface was protected or disturbed before forensic processing. We do not know what the FBI knows. We are working from what has been put on the public record. What we do know, what is fully and verifiably on the record, is this. Maureen O'Connell, a named former special agent with the FBI's Evidence Response Team, analyzed the available drone footage of Nancy Guthrie's property and did not see evidence that tire impression work had been conducted in the circle driveway. She identified the decomposed granite surface as a significant forensic complication. She identified the circle driveway as her leading professional assessment of where the vehicle that transported Nancy was staged. And she raised, carefully, explicitly, on the record, the concern that if that forensic work was not done in time, a potentially critical piece of vehicle identification evidence may be unrecoverable. That is not community speculation. That is not anonymous sourcing. That is a named, qualified forensic practitioner making a specific, substantiated professional observation to a named journalist about a real and ongoing case. It carries the weight that pedigree implies. 84-year-old women all over this country live alone, in properties with circle driveways and desert landscaping and neighbors whose dogs bark at unfamiliar sounds. They trust that their quiet residential neighborhood is safe. They have families who trust that too. Whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie, and we do not yet know the full truth, and we will not pretend to, it happened in a Tucson neighborhood near a property with a circle driveway paved in decomposed granite, and the window for some of the most critical physical evidence from that scene may have closed before anyone was looking in the right direction. We will keep watching.
We will keep tracking every development. Every time a practitioner speaks on the record, every time the FBI says something, or conspicuously does not, every time the evidence shifts in a direction that helps us understand what happened to Nancy. Because sustained,